Invite the panel up too.
We will, yes. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being here this afternoon. This is a special Subcommittee 6 oversight hearing on the importance of early education. I asked to have today's hearing because I have long had an interest in early education and thought it would be a good idea to help frame the discussion, the budget discussion for 2016. This subcommittee is designed to look at oversight issues that impact the entire budget and is made up from the chairs of each of the 5 subcommittees, and then eventually they will come in and out. It's a very busy day. I thought it was appropriate for us to gather today to discuss early education as the benefits of these programs accrue not just to the education programs but to many areas of the budget. We have joining us today, of course, a distinguished panel that will help demonstrate these benefits from their testimony. Want to know that today's hearing is focused only on the benefits of early childhood investment. We want to leave the important deliberations regarding early education budget to Mr. McCarty, Sub 2's committee, which is planning to have a hearing on April the 12th on these programs, including the governor's reform proposal. Many of our members, including the incoming speaker-elect, have stated that an expansion of early education is a major priority for them. Last year's budget included a $283 million increase in the funding of these programs, a significant increase. However, there has been that was just the start of for many of us to think and needs to address the needs of early learners. But budget discussions normally jump right to the price tag and the cost of it, and do not give us time to consider the benefits to California that could have from a robust, quality early education system. And I think it is important that we do this, as I pointed out in these comments, because we have, I think, as a House, as an Assembly, and as a Senate, for the last 2 years, been reinvesting in early care and child care. And it's been interesting because it has taken not only an interest on the part from the various education committees, but from our budget Sub 2 committee and Sub 1 committee, but also we've had the same kind of interest from our Women's Caucus, has made it a priority of the Legislative Women's Caucus. And so each year we recognize the tremendous challenge of funding the programs. My interest primarily is that we not only look at what we're doing, but if we're going to move forward to begin to really expand the program much more than just talking about slots and those kinds of things, we have to, in my mind, have a vision of where we want to go. And as a result of that, then with that vision of what we think it should look like in the end, we can then begin to talk about funding programs and basically accomplishing those goals. So I'm really pleased today that many of you are here. I know that the Vice Chair, Ms. Melendez, is on district business today and probably will not make it back in time. But we do have the Chair of Sub 2, Mr. McCarty, is here, and I want to leave it open to him if he has any comments at this time.
Not really, but maybe just say that, we have these discussions all the time. I'm looking at Mr. Chavez because he reminds us that what preschool is and early education is and what it is not. And so as opposed to focusing on how much money we have and what programs and TK, state preschool, or Head Start, or early TK, or the governor's new block grant, I think it's really good to take a step back and focusing on what the issue is, why it's so important, what the science behind it really shows us, and kind of give us a roadmap and a reminder as far as why these investments are critical to the future of California.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we're going to call forth our panel, and this distinguished panel has individuals from really across the state, but do some wonderful work for us and can help us as we talk about this particular topic. I want to call for Professor David Kerp, who is the James Marvell Professor at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley and a Senior Fellow in the Learning Policy Institute. Next, called Deborah Brown, who is the Director of Government Affairs for the California Department of Education. She just started in this role last week after years as an education advocate for children now, so we're lucky to have her back with us with CDE. We have with us Merced County District Attorney Larry Morris, who has been the DA in Merced for almost 10 years. Dr. Ida Flores, who has joined us from San Diego and she is the new executive director of the Elementary Institute of Science, a program that my children participated in for many, many years. I credit them for my daughter being a physician at this time, a nonprofit that seeks to stimulate the interest of youth in San Diego STEM. Dr. Flores has been an advocate for early education nationwide and is also the vice president of the National Association for the Education of Young Children. We're also lucky to have with us Robin Layton, and she is the CEO and president of the Education Enrichment System. Robin has been a leader in San Diego on this issue for over 3 decades. And finally, eventually, I'm not sure if she's here yet, Christina Garcia will be the vice chair of the Women's Caucus, will be joining us later on. She's driving back to Sacramento for this hearing, so we hope that she'll make it back in time. But if not, we know her interest and the interest of the Women's Caucus and support for early education and early care. At this time, we're going to ask each one of our panelists to begin. We'll begin with Dr. Kirk. Professor Kirk, and we're probably going to ask each one of you to give us the highlight of your topic for 5 to 7 minutes. That way we'll have much more time for conversation about the topic itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I want to begin by noting that Kevin and I were on a panel yesterday at the water cooler, and I was describing the glories of what New York City has done with a universal pre-K, high-quality, $10,000 a year program. And his question to me was, it sounds great, but where do they get the money? And my answer was, the mayor and the governor made it a very high priority. So I'm delighted to be here, the panel that also has it in mind to make early education a high priority. My assignment, as handed to me by my former student, Christian, was always nice to see how, right? Turnabout is fair play. I have a very easy assignment. It is to talk about the research that underlies early education. It's an easy assignment because I cannot think of a better documented relationship than the growth in all ways of healthy, good citizens, productive citizens, happier citizens, and early education. The relationship is stronger, for example, than the relationship between involving human agency and climate change. It's stronger than the relationship between smoking and cancer. Fortunately, we don't do research on smoking and cancer to do trial runs, but we do in early education. And we know from multiple strands of research how important the kind of helping kids and their parents from the earliest days on is. So much of this is going to be familiar to you, but let me give you the highlights, as Dr. Weber requested. Neuroscience has been said for a very long time now. This is 40 years worth of research that has shown that the earliest years of the time of greatest brain plasticity, the time of the greatest brain development, it's when new architectural structures are created in the brain that have lifelong impacts. And to borrow a phrase from James Heckman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, skill begets skill. So what you learn becomes the basis for what else you learn. And the point is not, as somebody used to say, use it or lose it. The point is it's much harder and much more expensive to do the kind of work in brain development later on than it is if you are if you reach children early in their lives. We know from genetics used to be seen as this contest between genes and environment, genes versus environment. We know that's wrong. All the research in the last 20 years says that it really is the interaction that matters. It's not genes versus environment, it's genes through environment, nature through nurture, which tells you how important those early years are going to be. And the genetics and the neuroscience together really frame the relevant biology of our biology. We know about the evaluations of high quality pre-kindergarten programs. Some of them are decades long. Most famously, Perry Preschool. Somebody described these children as the 118 most famous subjects in social science ever. You trace a group of kids, half of whom had 2 years of good preschool, including home visitations and well-trained teachers, and you look 40 years down the road at the continuing impact of preschool on everything from health, education, work relationship, happiness and family, avoidance of the criminal justice system. very, very impressive set of data. And there are a couple of other studies that also trace kids for decades. People say to me, well, that's great, but that was then. This is now. What's going on with real pre-K programs? And fortunately, there's a body of very impressive ongoing research in New Jersey with the Abbott program, which targets poor kids, in Boston with a universal pre-kindergarten program, with Tulsa, which also has a universal pre-kindergarten program, showing strong effects and continuing strong effects. The New Jersey study takes these kids through 5th grade. The Tulsa study, we're about to hear very, very promising results through 8th grade. And everything we know, we haven't seen, let me just stop here, we haven't seen a single piece of research on a good program that has not had great results. So some of you will say, but there's this Tennessee study that you've heard of. Well, the Tennessee study makes my case. It's a terribly implemented program. Teachers were left on their own. Go find a curriculum, teach little kids. They'd never done it. And it's not a great surprise they wouldn't do it well. So if there's a takeaway from what I have to say, it's exactly where Dr. Weber was starting us off. It's got to be done well. It isn't a matter of throwing money at programs. Now, economists have translated this research into dollar and cents return on investment. Lifelong benefits estimated at 7 to 1. Now, the problem with talking to politicians about lifelong benefits is they're not around for all the lives of children. But you can begin to see those savings very early on. Fewer kids sent to special education, fewer kids left back, large cost savings early on, and life savings. I mean, just imagine the effect on a child not to be left back because of the quality of their early experience. Now, the focus in California and elsewhere has been heavily on pre-K, on 4-year-olds, and to some extent on 3-year-olds. I hope that changes. Everything that one could say about the benefits of early education to 3- and 4-year-olds, you'd say many times more for infants and toddlers. We know what that research looks like. We know that the famous word gap that separates kids from professional families and kids from poor families, 30 million word gap and words heard by a child at the age of 4, you have a huge, that word gap is evident as soon as you can measure kids' recognition of words. 10 months, 18 months, and it doubles each time round. So providing little children, not just with babysitting, not just with warmth and care, very important, but also an opportunity for them to be the explorers they are is really, really important. We know how to do this. We have a boutique program, EduCare, which is just opening in the San Jose area, which has demonstrated that if you take kids from the toughest neighborhoods and you give them a really strong grounding for 4 or 5 years, they get to kindergarten academically exactly as well off as the average kid in America. That's pretty impressive in a way, but it's a reminder that you give kids an opportunity, they're going to flourish. And there's a wonderful program called Triple P, the Positive Parenting Program. The data on the effects that this program has, not just on 118 kids, but on huge areas. 11 South Carolina rural counties versus 11 other South Carolina rural counties, on a whole array of benefits. So there are important things to be done, to support parents, to support kids. 2 other comments. One is, it's really crucial that early learning be linked to K-12, that we not silo this universe. And then indeed, if you start thinking 0 to 20 as opposed to thinking of these systems as in competition with one another, that's vital. And again, as the chair said, this is not just about education, it's not just about health, it really reaches across all the domains, which is why it makes so much sense for this committee to be taking up the question. And finally, it's really important, I would argue, for early education, and particularly pre-kindergarten, to be available to all children. For one thing, all children are going to benefit. We all know how crucially important early education is to the poorest kids. What we don't know is that middle-class kids start out in school as far behind their professional counterparts as poor kids start out in school behind their middle-class peers. And kids learn from each other. You know, a lot of learning. And so in a recent study in Boston, it's clear that poor kids gained a lot from being in classes when they had other kids who came from different backgrounds and who could share different kinds of experiences with them. You are, as you said, going to be getting into the nitty-gritty dollars and cents at some point down the road. But I urge you to tattoo this mantra on your brain, to think about whenever you're looking at policy, think about what I call the policy version of the golden rule. It's very simple. Every child deserves what you would want for a child that you love. Every child deserves what you would want for a child that you love. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members. Thank you for inviting us here today, and thank you for taking the opportunity to really talk about this important issue so we do get above some of the fray and really focus in on what it means for the lives of kids. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, my name is Deborah Brown, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs, and I'm here on behalf of State Superintendent Tom Torlakson. California's most valuable resource is our human capital. I don't think I need to say this to folks here, but sometimes it's worth emphasizing. And this begins with our youngest children. Over 120 studies, some of them Professor Kerp referenced, have found that quality preschool programs producing lasting gains with cognitive benefits equivalent to reducing at least half the achievement gap between students. Research shows that high quality early care and education can have a long-lasting positive effects, setting kids up with new skills, knowledge, and attitudes necessary for success in school and life. In addition, research shows that the first years of life are the most critical for brain development. Again, Professor Kerp talked about that. The state superintendent and the CDE believe that investing in our youngest learners provides the greatest return on investment of any educational investment. We also strongly believe that quality matters, and working towards continuous quality improvement is critical in continuing to improve child outcomes. For over 75 years, California has invested in an early learning system to ensure that our youngest and most vulnerable children are prepared to enter school ready to succeed. In 2013, California completed a comprehensive roadmap for the development of our early learning systems, the California Comprehensive Early Learning Plan, and that's been distributed to you. Even though most states ended their funding for child care and development programs after the end of World War II, California continued its leadership and support of programs to provide young children with the highest needs the foundation for success throughout school. Children with the highest needs, the foundation for success throughout school and into adulthood. It's important that California continue to invest in and increase access to high-quality early learning and care services to help prepare our children for school and to provide parents with needed child care services so that they may continue to work. Quality early learning is an effective way to prevent future problems in education, health, and economic productivity that strains California's budget and weakens our competitiveness. For vulnerable children, the achievement gap opens up before they enter kindergarten, and it is very difficult and costly to close. As a state, our focus should not be on closing the achievement gap, but on preventing it. Quality early learning and care is a proven strategy for reducing deficits and promoting economic growth with research, such as the Abecedarian Project, showing that benefits persist even 30 years later. Children who participate in quality early learning education are more likely to be reading at grade level in third grade, a crucial predictor for future success. Nobel Prize laureate economist James Heckman's data conclusively shows that every dollar invested in quality early learning education for at-risk children delivers economic gains of 7 to 10% per year and creates immediate and long-term benefits to society. His work proves that prevention through early childhood development is more cost-effective than remediation. These savings are manifested through higher achievement in reading and math, reduction in the need for special education services, 44% lower grade retention rates, higher graduation rates by as much as 29%, and better health outcomes, lower criminal justice cost, increased college enrollment, higher earnings, and less welfare assistance. Decades of program evaluation show us that quality of early learning childhood investments will determine their rate of return. We know that that there are programs that work, but there is also plenty that don't, and investments that don't pay off. Effective early childhood programs generate benefits to society that far exceed program costs. Evidence from 40 years of program evaluation data shows us that effective, high-quality programs have a cluster of effectiveness favors in common. Programs with inadequately trained personnel, poor child-to-adult ratios, excessive child-to-adult ratios, and limited or development inappropriate learning opportunities are unlikely to have significant effects, particularly for the most disadvantaged children. Without quality and accountability, we cannot ensure that more children enter kindergarten ready to succeed. Continuing to invest in programs that lack sufficient quality is unwise and unproductive. The greatest economic returns from investment in early childhood typically are long-term. We know that it's important to look at costs and benefits longitudinally and to consider social and economic benefits as a legacy for tomorrow, built from sound decision-making today. programs that generate the largest surplus of benefits relative to costs or the most productive rates of return generate greater value for public and private investment. CD is proud of the work invested to improve the quality of early childhood programs in California, particularly the quality rating and improvement system. Currently being implemented as a partnership with First Five California through local consortia and supported by the California State Preschool Program and Infant Toddler QRIS block grants. So in closing, the superintendent is committed to working with the legislature, administration, and our stakeholders and partners to continue to expand and improve our early learning system. And I, too, will leave you with an urgent call to action. If our American way of life fails the child, it fails us all. And that's from Pearl S. Buck. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Larry.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Some of you may wonder if I took a wrong turn somewhere at the elevator and I should be at the Public Safety Committee. What a DA from Merced is doing here in Education Subcommittee. But I got involved in a program that many of you are familiar with, an organization many of you are familiar with, Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, many years ago, shortly after I was elected district attorney. And I'm here both as the district attorney in Merced County and representing Fight Crime, Invest in Kids. When you hear that there's an organization that is comprised of district attorneys, police chiefs, sheriffs, and victims advocates, you're probably inclined to think that they're here advocating for tougher sentences, more prison, more accountability in the criminal justice system. But Fight Crime, Invest in Kids is an organization of all those different members of the criminal justice system whose mission it is to lobby on behalf of evidence-based, proven strategies to keep kids out of the system, which is the definition of success in public safety, is not holding people accountable, it's keeping them out of the system entirely. My first encounter with Fight Crime, Invest in Kids came with a study that I read, which was done by a professor, a UC Berkeley professor and a Canadian professor, both of whom were economics professors. And the study was very compelling because its thesis basically was, if we could increase graduation rates in high school by 10 percentage points, just 10 percentage point increase in high school graduation rates in California, we would have 400 fewer homicides every year. That's because the relationship between dropouts and crime is so well established and so incontrovertible. Now, I've prosecuted dozens of murder cases myself, and I can tell you there's very, very little joy in the process. It's justice, it's holding people accountable, but it is not an affirmation of that which is best about our communities. What we are wanting to do is figure out ways that we can keep kids out of the system entirely. Some of you may have seen the story in the Los Angeles Times yesterday, talking about the economics of it, that LA County spends more than $233,000 a year to hold each youth in a juvenile lockup. Now, that's a 4-year college degree at some of the finest universities in this country. That's the 1-year cost to keep a kid in the juvenile facility in Los Angeles. In San Diego, Madam Chair, it was $127,000, and those numbers are being replicated in cities around the state and across the country. We know that early education is essential to giving kids the long-term running start that they need to stay engaged and succeed in elementary school and beyond. Too many children, especially those from low-income families, are not getting the intellectual stimulation they need, and they begin elementary school one step behind, increasing the chances that they may drop out before graduating high school. The single largest, most significant determination of whether someone's going to be in the criminal justice system is high school dropout. Between high school dropouts and foster care, that accounts for most of our prison populations throughout the country. If you are a high school dropout, you are 7 times more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. you're obviously 5 times more likely to require public assistance. So for me as district attorney dealing with the long-term public safety future for my county, the very best thing I can do, the greatest success, isn't prosecuting criminals and locking them up. It's working collaboratively with educators and other stakeholders in our system to get as many kids as possible through high school at a minimum. We know early education yields results. Chicago program that served over 100,000 children found that at-risk kids who did not attend a high-quality preschool were 70% more likely to be arrested for violent crime by the time they turned 18, and by age 26, nearly 40% more likely to have spent time behind bars. For state-funded programs, the studies are equally compelling. In New Jersey, North Carolina, and Michigan, children who participated in state-funded preschool programs were less likely to need special education, less likely to be held back in school, and graduated high school at much higher rates. Those are tested and proven results. We are all too painfully aware of the high cost of incarceration. Research shows early education could actually save over $1 billion in incarceration costs each year. Our prison system is under a federal court decree to get its population down. If we don't find the will and the resources to invest in proven programs that increase the odds of kids graduating from high school, we'll be facing the prison crowding issues for decades to come. It's the age-old conundrum, invest now or pay the piper later. As a prosecutor, I would much prefer to attend high school graduations than criminal sentencings. But we need your leadership and your advocacy to make a difference in what the public safety future holds for California. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ida Flores.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Weber and members of the committee, for this opportunity to join you for this hearing. Today, I'm wearing several different professional hats. I'm here as the Executive Director of the Elementary Institute of Science, which has served the children in Southeast San Diego and Dr. Weber's district for over 50 years. I'm also the Vice President of the National Association for the Education of Young Children. We have about 70,000 members nationwide, and I'm very happy and proud to say that California is our strongest affiliate, our largest affiliate. In that position on that national board, I have a national bird's eye view of what's happening with early childhood across the country. And what we see is momentum. We see states across the nation. We've heard here today about New Jersey. There are other states, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Arizona, Minnesota, Georgia. All these states are figuring out ways to create effective mixed delivery early childhood systems that create access to high-quality early childhood for large numbers of children. We see that momentum even in states that we don't usually think about when we hear cutting edge or educational innovation. And why is that the case? Well, the benefits of early childhood you've been hearing here today are so compelling that many of those states that we don't think about when we think of cutting edge, they're needing to pay attention, and they're paying attention to the evidence. Tomorrow in San Diego, James Heckman will be meeting and speaking with members of the philanthropy and business community. And I was going to say, if you haven't yet heard of Dr. Heckman's research in a nutshell, but you now have, but I'll repeat it because it bears repeating, that there is simply no better use of public funds than investments in early childhood education. We really can't get it wrong. Investments in early learning lead to broad cross-sector outcomes, including better preparation to enter the workforce, reduce incarceration, everything we've heard here. We can't get it wrong when we invest in early childhood. I want to go back to focus a little bit on some remarks that Dr. Kerp made as well. I think those of us who have worked in early childhood, we hear this about how we now know from developmental science that those early interactions shape the human brain. And we've heard it so often. Sometimes I think it's really easy to not really pause and think about what that really means. That's profound. Another hat that I wear is that I was a school psychologist for over 20 years, and my doctorate's in educational psychology. I've actually seen in my own practice as an educational psychologist the effects of early childhood education or not having high quality early childhood education and those outcomes later on. 20 years ago, we thought that the genetic code was set in stone. We now know that human interactions early on actually can activate or deactivate key genes that affect children's ability to regulate their behavior. When I was a new school psychologist back in 1990, I was all set to work with adolescents. I wanted to work with middle school kids. And I had a change of heart. And the reason I had a change of heart was because I would get these really thick files, special education records, and I started to realize that there were really no new referrals for special education once you hit a certain age. And I sat down and I'd go through the files, do a record review, and I would say to myself, where could we have helped this child so that they weren't so far off track by the time they hit 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, on track for high school dropout? And invariably, as I look back through the record and did that record review, the answers were in early childhood. And so I made a decision to completely switch my career and focus on early childhood because I figured if I wanted to help middle school kids, I really needed to help them before they even started school. So as I close today, I'd like to wear one other hat as I close, and that's my personal hat. It's the one I wear as a native San Diegan. I'm the granddaughter of low-wage, minimally educated immigrant laborers. My education started in a neighborhood preschool during the early years of the California State Preschool Program. I'm an early graduate of our state's investment in early education. And in that high-quality early education classroom, I fell in love with learning. That's a very personal way of saying everything that we've talked about here. It's a way of saying that my brain architecture was affected by the experiences I had in that high-quality preschool. My education continued through the public school system and culminated in a PhD, but my success didn't start when I completed grad school or when I graduated college or even high school. It began in a California publicly funded early education program. Every child in our state deserves the same learning opportunity that I had. And in the weeks to come, as you deliberate our state's budget, I urge you to consider how California can provide that same solid start for all of our young children. Thank you.